Welcome to So Very Easy. My name is Laura, and I have a friend who has just discovered the joy of quilting, and I want to make her a little something to celebrate along with her. And I think this free pattern will be the perfect little quilt. So the free pattern is from the Fat Quarter Shop. I'll put a link in the description for you. It's not a large quilt. It's nice and small. It's 13.5 inches by 38.5 inches. So you could have it as a little table runner, or you could always hang it up and put it sideways. And because it's small, we don't need a lot of fabric. So I've taken time and I've cut all of the fabric out first. I am going to do a blue, a gold, and the silver for the blade, but you could have a lot of fun and have some really fun fabric with this. It's a nice way of using up some scraps. So let's start sewing. The first thing that we're going to start with is that blade. So we're going to start with that 5.5 inch square, and we're going to turn it into a snowball block. So we do need to add these little squares on the corners, draw a line diagonal to diagonal, and then stitch along those lines. When I sew these corners on, I do draw that line from corner to corner, but I don't stitch on the line. I stitch immediately beside it. So that line is right there, and the stitching is immediately beside it, which means that thread did not take up any extra space. The idea is when we fold that over, it should match exactly. So by stitching over a little bit, it just gives a little bit of thread space. So I can now cut off those little points, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So when I press these back, I'm still going to have a 5.5 inch square. Once that's done, we're going to be able to add on some straight edges, and that will turn into a square. Then we're going to add on another border. So we're going to have a square. And the directions do have the arrows on which way to press the seams. We now want to turn this square into a circle, so we're going to add corners. And they're 4.5 inch squares. So we're going to place it, draw a line, and stitch on that line. So we need to do that to all 4 corners. We can now trim off that extra, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And when we press this out, the block will now equal a 9.5 inch square. We will need 2 squares from the same fabric that we're going to use for the rotary cutter handle. And those will go on 2 sides. The other 2 squares will be the background fabric. And at this point, it won't matter what 2 we put them on. Draw those lines corner to corner, stitch, and trim off. This block will still equal 9.5 inches. We're just turning this inside shape into a circle. The blade part is done. I do have the fabric for the background, and this will go onto the other side, which would be the safety in a blade. Because I have chosen a white background, I did take the fabric and pressed it in. And that way, I will not have anything showing through on that white. We can put this aside. We're going to work on this next section. We have 2 rectangular pieces, 3.5 by 5.5. We want to put a corner on each side. We need the opposite sides, so if you lay them out, that way we make sure we're getting it the right way. We cannot have them on any other side. These will eventually get sewn in between, so we want this curve shape. So draw those lines and stitch and trim. And once again, because I do not want that shadow to show through, I did press the seams towards that darker color. We will need this longer piece to go in the middle, but before we do that, we need to sew some little ends. We will need a handle color and a background fabric. Handle and background. So we're going to sew these two together first. And then they will go right on this end, which means this piece will fit in perfectly. That safety switch is now done, and if we want, we can put those together. And that side will measure 9.5 inches. We have a nice big long handle. This is 6.5 inches by 19.5 inches. And we need to put those corners on, just 2 edges. Same thing, corner to corner, and trim off. So this is going to turn it into a curve. With those corners done, we're going to be able to add sides in that background fabric, 1.5 inches by that 19 inches. We have that one handle done, so we can now put that together. We're going to be able to finish that off by a 2.5 by 9.5 on each side, and then we're going to add one more strip to go along these 2 long sides to frame it off. The rotary cutter is now done. It does equal 13.5 inches by 38.5 inches, which makes a really nice table runner. But it doesn't mean we need to end there. We could add some borders on it and make it the center of a quilt, and it would be just as much fun. Or we could do numerous and make it a quilt with a bunch of different colored rotary cutters. It took me more time to choose the fabric and cut the fabric than it did to actually make the cutter. This has been a super fun quilt to make. Fun enough, I'm going to make one for myself. I'll put a link in the description to the free pattern, and thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're cutting up next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.